At 4ZZZ, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we broadcast. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Jagera people. We acknowledge that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded.
And we stand in solidarity with them.
You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ, amplifying the trans and gender non-conforming voices of Brisbane and beyond.
Hello, you're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ, amplifying the voices of the trans and gender non-conforming community of the city and beyond. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which 4ZZZ broadcasts, the Turrbal, Yagara and Jagera people. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to acknowledge brother boy and sister girls as well into this conversation, as trans people are not a new concept and have been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This week on Tranzmission is a special episode. It's 2 years since Tranzmission came on air, and I've got a special guest to help inspire the inception and beginning of Tranzmission, who we'll later introduce to you. And I'd also like to say, people keep going on about Pride Month. June is not Pride Month, everybody. June is Pride Month for the US in the Northern Hemisphere. Pride Month is about coming out, which is why it's spring, usually, when you come out. Pride Month is actually September here, down under. So I'm cool with all the pride. It's always good to have pride all year round, but it's actually a month of mourning, as it's in commemoration of Stonewall, among many other particularly tragic and horrendous crimes against LGBTQI plus people around the world. So not Pride Month. However, we can still pep the energy up. We've got a bunch of events that will be celebrating some things around Pride, such as Pride Before Commerce, which is Stonewall Day, Saturday, June 29th at Jagera Hall at 121 Cordelia Street in South Brisbane. This is a free all-ages event, and it's being organised by Meanjin's People's Pride. So there'll be a rally, march, art and community stalls, as well as bands, panels, and there's a lot more info to come, so I'll keep you updated on that. And then on Sunday, June 30th, is Tranz Town Hall, which is an event put on by Trans Affirming Clothing Drive. They'll be holding a community night where you have a chance to learn and build connections with some other trans and gender diverse artists and activists, and yeah, it's going to be a pretty wholesome evening. There'll also be some food and some fun. I don't know what the fun is yet, but I suppose it will be fun. There's also the Tea Cottage. This is a more regular event that's come back, which is Queer Care Club is back on 91 Commercial Road in Tenerife, which is a pretty accessible area, every Thursday from 12:15 p.m. till 2 p.m. The price for this is about $45 for a full, $30 for low income, and $15 for concession. They do sessions on, so there's a 30-minute queer trauma, and then there's a sensitive movement, followed by tea, light snacks and chats, and then you can bring your own lunch if you'd like as well. So yeah, you can check that out on the Tranzmission socials at trans.radio with a Z. And also, in some other news, UK Secretary uses emergency powers to criminalise possession of puberty blockers. So this follows on from the Cass review. So on May 31st, letters went to the National Health Service of England to parents of trans youth, stating that they must immediately stop taking puberty blockers and that possession will be considered a crime. The UK government has banned puberty blockers for transgender youth, initiated by Conservative Secretary of State for Health and Social Care Victoria, Mary Atkins. This move was made via emergency powers, criminalises the possession of puberty blockers even for parents who obtain them through private doctors. The decision was made following the seriously problematic Cass review. The prohibition relies on a decades-old law that allows for the emergency prohibition of medications without the need for a full legislative process. No vote was taken on the edict, and the order was issued just before Parliament dissolved for the general election, meaning it could not be overturned. Despite this, there are still avenues for accessing medication, though concerns persist about its impact on transgender individuals. Efforts are underway to challenge the ban through legal means, with crowdfunding campaigns supporting the cause. Joe Mugham of the Good Law Project stated of a potential change to the edict, saying, "An urgent legal challenge is being prepared to these highly irresponsible regulations, and we will help fund it." They're requesting donations for the goodlawproject.org crowdfunder. I just checked that this morning, and they have actually reached their goal of £20,000. They managed to do that in 3 days. So there are a lot of support for trans people, and for us to be able to stand in solidarity with our UK siblings. And also, I'd like to be mindful that the cast review, as you may have listened to last week's episode on Tranzmission with Bet and Alexis, which was unbelievable coverage, we will continue that coverage. We're going to have another conversation about the cast review and break it down further in coming weeks. So stay tuned to Tranzmission. And yeah, a special thanks to Bet for having one of their debut episodes as a co-host of Tranzmission last week and covering the cast review. It's a really heavy topic and she's doing really good work for us by peeling it apart and breaking it down. In honor of that, I'd like to play some of her music, actually. Not only is she an amazing activist and radio announcer, she's also a musician. So we're going to listen to this track called Need to Know by Bet Noir. You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ.
Yeah.
Amplifying the voices of the trans and gender non-conforming community of Meanjin, Brisbane and beyond.
Tranzmission on 4ZZZ brings you the latest in trans community news, music and events.
Every Tuesday from 9am till 10am.
Join our team of hosts for an hour of celebrating the unique perspectives of the trans community.
Tranzmission, Tuesday mornings from 9am till 10am on 4ZZZ. You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. All the music you hear is by trans artists only. Yeah, we specialise in making sure that you're knowing who you're listening to and that hearing the sounds of trans and queer voices. So yeah.
How many genders are there?
I don't know. I just got here.
We're about to dive into a bit of a little chat with a special guest today. 2 years ago, Tranzmission began. It started out not as a show idea, but an inspiration from some actually not so great broadcasting that we ended up going through, and we went through a process. And the person that helped with that process is a wonderful guest, Bridget. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, okay. This all sounds so weird.
It was like, you were just saying before, it's like, oh, it feels so long ago now. And I guess 2 years, it does, things move quickly.
Yeah.
Especially for trans people. 2 years is a lot of time, so.
Yeah, it can be.
So I remember there was like a broadcast on another show of ours, Paradigm Shift, a couple of years ago, and one of our announcers gave the microphone to someone who was speaking about anti-trans rhetoric, and it didn't... For the audience, it didn't go so well, and you were one of the audience members. I actually didn't hear it, so I heard about it later. But do you want to share a little bit about what happened?
I can't remember. Was Pineapple Rebellion before them or after them or something? Or,
yeah,
I think
same day.
Same day, yeah. Because I'd had to drive out to Virginia or somewhere, so it was a little bit of a hike, and I was chasing down electrical components for my latest hyperfixation. And so I had to get some obscure parts, and I went out there, and then... This was one car ago, because now I'm just, I don't know, new car's got Android Auto and I'm all Spotifying ancient music now. But yeah, I was listening to 4ZZZ in the car all the time in my pre-Android Auto days. And yeah, I was out there, I was about to head back and I had my little stash of bits and bobs. And then I was listening to these IWD speeches that were being played. And they were just kind of playing them and uncritically just letting them fly. And then, I think it was Brisbane's number one turf was then given their little spiel. And I was like, oh my God, how can they just let this play without, first giving a disclaimer, but then, after they let it play, they just were like, oh yeah, moving on to the next thing. And I was like, hold on, you just had this rabid turf going on about anti-trans stuff, and then I think one of the guests that the turf brought on was someone that had this big rant about men's violence against women, with the implication being that trans women were part of that, and it was just horrible, and I was like, this is not cool.
So, it would have been really jarring, especially from a station that we trust, right?
I know, I'd been listening to 4ZZZ for ages, and I guess you guys are giving me heaps of cool new tunes. Like, anyone that's sort of, shouty, grungy, that kind of realm, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'll give them a listen. And there's been heaps of bands that I wouldn't have known about if not for 4ZZZ. And, listening to Paradigm Shift was a good one. And I think that you had some social workers on air. I'm not sure.
Yeah, possibly,
there was a couple of good programs in there. And I pointed them out to my wife, who's a wonderful social worker. And I was like, oh, really good topics here. You've got to give this a listen. And then Pineapple Rebellion, dissecting all the Queensland politics and everything, and Dykes on Mics and stuff. And I've known Blair for a while now too. And it's kind of like, it's just been this, it was a safe sort of thing. And then to hear that rabid transphobia, I was like, nah, this is not cool. And it didn't seem to fit with the station identity, I guess. So I actually can't remember the sequence, but I think I fired off an email or something, made an angry video or something on YouTube, and I was just like, this is so annoying.
Yeah, and then I think you had a phone conversation with former station manager Stephen Stockwell.
Yeah, that would have been a long chat, I reckon. And yeah, we just talked about a bunch of stuff, and I don't know, I think maybe during that was when I sort of said, maybe we need to platform some trans voices, not some anti-trans voices, and some kind of like, hey, look, we did a bad thing. How can we fix it? Let's try to do that. Yeah. Which is really cool because after that, I remember Stocky at the time coming to me after having a very long phone conversation with you. I don't know if you had more than one or... I think there might have been, yeah.
Yeah, it might have been a couple of phone calls. And he comes to me and I was probably only like 3 or 4 months into my transition. I just left, which was Z Games, which is the video games broadcast on Thursday evenings. And I was like, I don't know what to do, and I really admired Stephen Stockwell and his work with Triple J and Hack and as a journalist, and he comes to me and he goes, hey Ez, would you like to do like a mini series where you interview different kinds of people about trans issues and transgender life and so on and so on? And obviously I was like, absolutely, yes I do. I'm still learning the community myself, so like I'm still learning how I fit in the community and my transness and my identity. Wow, yeah. So I was like, well, this will be really great for me because it will I will learn whilst also we can educate our listeners and we can do something to remedy this really poor broadcast that we did. And so then I started doing some research and I started trying to figure out who I would like to interview, and every single topic that came up, there were like 10 other things, like 10 other topics that came out of it. And I was like...
It's a bit like that.
I was like, whoa, my gosh, transness is my identity, but it is now also my special interest. And so then I was like, okay, well... And I went back to Stocky after a couple of months and I was like, hey dude, look, I've been doing this research and I really want to produce these shows for you. However, I think there needs to be a forever ongoing broadcast that just exists, because every topic I come up against, there's more that needs to be dissected. And the more research I did, I realized that there aren't any trans broadcasts in the way that I think there needs to be one. And I pitched him this and our programming coordinator as well, Ian Pound. And together they were like, yeah, let's do this. Let's have a show. And I don't know what night it was, but I came up with Tranzmission. I thought it was a nice little fusion and pun, which, trans people, we love puns. So, yeah, 2 years ago on this day was the very first broadcast. So,
wow, okay. And like you were sort of saying, as you start to research, it does expose all the different sort of aspects of things. And then, I guess, as time marches on and sort of eras and focuses within society change, I've noticed everything evolves and everything adjusts around that. And so, trans people have had a pretty bumpy road, and it's just been going on for so long. But I kind of think the evolution is kind of going through more rapid phases now.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. There's never going to be an end to what you can talk about on this station, and until we get to some Star Trek utopia kind of thing, which
fingers crossed.
We're just not heading towards that. So yeah.
Well, we'll go to some music now, and when we come back, we can chat more about how some of your experience in the past with transitioning through the Australian Defence Force, and also like maybe we could talk a bit about how things are real. The discourse and the media around trans people now seems actually a lot worse than it used to be, surprisingly. So we'll dive into a bit of that. You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ.
Huge thanks to Chris, a first-time subscriber here at 4ZZZ. He heroically decided to grab a full subscription and even threw in a $5 tax-deductible donation just to mix things up. Here's a few things Chris gets access to now that he's a subscriber. Discounts at all of our subscriber discount outlet locations, chances to win a number of prizes in any one of our cool giveaways, cheaper tickets to all 4ZZZ events, and a healthy dose of warm inner glow. There are heaps of perks to being a subscriber, so be like Chris and head to 4ZZZ.org.au and subscribe today.
Woo! Yeah! You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. My name is Ez. I use he, him pronouns.
My name's Bridget. I use she, her pronouns.
Wonderful. Well, you're listening to Tranzmission. We're chatting about well, yeah, it's 2 years of transmission today, but it's also a wonderful time because we're chatting about, well, I don't know if it's so wonderful, but we're chatting about how things once were for trans people before all this discourse in the media. You know, in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, it seems to have really perpetuated a lot of discourse around where did trans people come from? Wow, we never even knew they were there this whole time. And everyone seems so perplexed and confused about this whole gender bender, gendetta, or whatever people think we have. And Bridget, you've spent some time serving the Australian Defence Force, and you were saying to me another time that how things used to actually be kind of easier back then, and now it seems a little harder.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, like, I guess being a Gen Xer, a younger Gen Xer, like, I guess I sort of grew up pre-internet, and I saw that kind of, like, the technology's grown up with our generation, and it's really mad just seeing how niche some information used to be and how little of it was out there, and how you had to really fight a bit harder to find your info, whereas now it's all there. So it's kind of, in some ways, things are easier because it's easy to get a handle on what information you kind of need and what you're looking for and that kind of thing. But obviously the rhetoric's gone down. But I guess, like, from my perspective, my sort of figuring out where I stood came in like 2009-ish. And it wasn't until, like, I saw medical professionals in 2009, and it was really hard finding info on the internet even then. And there was a lot of sort of legacy stuff. So pre-90s info, there was a lot of really weird, misleading kind of trans stuff out there. And then I guess even in 2009, a lot of the signals that I was sort of getting were that the ultimate goal of transitioning was being stealth and passing. And there was such a heavy emphasis on that.
Yes.
And it was really odd. So I think that led to most people not knowing a trans person back then, because everyone was trying to fly under the radar. And then when I was sort of looking at the ADF and thinking, you know, I think we can handle this, because I was looking for examples, and I found that, like, the British military had a couple of people transition, and the way they handled it wasn't terrible. It wasn't awesome, but they had policies. But again, they were trying to reinforce the stealthiness of it. So they almost like, it's almost like their policies were geared around making the person disappear and then reappear, and they would give you new service numbers and new everything. And, like,
right,
yeah, so it was almost like,
erase all of this, we'll pretend that you never existed before this time.
Here's this new person with this number and whatever, and no history, and just like, bam. I thought that was a bit odd, but, you know, I was it's
kind of a form of erasure, that.
It is a form of erasure, but that fitted in with the narrative at the time.
Right.
And I guess some other weird things that have come out, and, you know, a lot's been written about this. There was a book written by Noah Reisman called Serving in Silence, I believe. Anyway, there's a chapter about my story in that kind of thing, but that talks about the kind of the history of things and sort of goes through it all in great depth. I mean, we're kind of skimming the surface here. But the ADF was actually supporting same-sex couples before we had marriage equality in Australia, like a long time before. And so they would treat same-sex couples the same as married couples in terms of housing them and moving them around the country and everything. So, like, they would get a married quarter. That's what they were called back then, you know, like, which is a house that was big enough for a family kind of thing. And so it was kind of like, it was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And that's why when I looked at the whole transitioning situation, I was kind of like, well, if the Brits have sorted it out, Canada seems to have sorted it out, we're totally fine and treating gay people better than our government kind of requires everyone to treat gay people and couples. I was like, we kind of had that sort of spirit of equality sort of going for us. And I was like, surely if I give them all the answers, transitioning isn't going to be the end of the world. But, you know, it kind of was. So, you know, it wasn't the best. It wasn't like overtly nasty. It was kind of like that old school discrimination of, like, we're not going to say the quiet part out loud. We're just going to kick you out kind of thing, you know?
Right. And insidious, quiet, passive as
and
well.
So it's morphed. And so, you know, through the couple of years that I was sort of butting heads with the military and they were driving me crazy, but, you know, through that we got the policy changed. Dozens of people have transitioned and kept their careers in the military now. So I think there's like a satirical page on social media, like intersectional imperialism, and it's kind of weird with, you know, the way my mind has sort of changed since I've left the military. You know, it's like, oh, cool, you know, you can serve the empire as a trans person now. It's like, so it's like, I did that. Ah, crap.
The Venn diagram as well of things that meet as well.
Yeah, so it's like, it's cool that they get to keep their careers and everything. We changed the policy, and I kind of think we did it just in time before the rhetoric took a turn where, like, because I kind of think if after, say, I don't know, well, like after the Trumpocalypse sort of began, I kind of think if the first person to stick their hand up to the ADF and say, oh, I want to transition now, you know, that's sort of late 20-teens, I kind of think they might have dug in harder and gone, actually, you know what? No, we're not going to change this now.
Yeah, right.
Because when I transitioned, like in 09-10, that's when I was kind of really fighting with them, there wasn't this huge anti-trans movement yet. So they kind of looked at everything on its merits, looked at all the, I guess, the legal and medical history and kind of went, yeah, well, maybe we can sort of deal with this. And they kind of reluctantly sort of just changed.
Yeah, because it was in 2009 the first Rudd government introduced equal entitlements to military retirement pensions and superannuations for domestic partners of LGBTQI+ personnel. And then since 2010, transgender personnel may serve openly and may undergo gender transition with the ADF, with ADF support while continuing their military service.
Yeah,
so
that's what I fought for, yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yeah, so, I mean, I didn't, like, I guess it's kind of like, I guess there's a lot of trauma around that, like, personally, like, because everything was sort of cruising along, and then I had this thing that I needed to do and to be authentic, you know, and transition, and that was kind of the cause of a lot of administrative, like, fighting between me and the military, effectively, and it kind of, I don't know, like, that I don't think you can repair that, and they didn't want to even really try, so I think the easier thing was just to, like, medically retire me and just kind of let me go, and yeah, like, it took a while for that to sort of sink in, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I made some gains, I made some losses, and I guess I'm not in a terrible position now. I mean, ideally I would have kept my career, but other people have been able to, so I've kind of just moved on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it was obviously a really painful time in your life as well. I mean, it's not an easy thing to transition full stop, let alone having what feels like the world against you. So
yeah, and I guess being in, like, I guess that's a huge part of your identity. And as someone who'd been, you know, avoiding acknowledging internally that there was this, you know, trans struggle that, I mean, I didn't have the words for in the 90s, 80s. You know, so the military was a good place to build your identity around and sort of latch onto that and build everything around that. And so when that sort of got removed, and I was transitioning at the same time and trying to figure everything out, like, yeah, there's a lot of change to deal with. And in some ways, I don't think I did it very well. So, yeah. I
mean, you're here now.
I am here now.
You know, and it's been a long time since then. It's been like 15 years.
Yeah.
No, 14 years.
It still feels fresh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you also do some, so since the military, you've done lots of other things as well. And you also, like, you build cars, is that right?
I have been starting to mod cars, yeah. So I got my midlife crisis car, and I watched a bunch of stuff online, and I looked up a bunch of stuff, and I was like, why not start, you know, learning how to swap bits out and stuff. So, you know, getting nice aftermarket parts from Japan for my little Subaru, and
nice,
and make it sound and go really nice. And I took it to
modding
the track.
your Subaru. You're living the lesbian dream.
I know. Yeah. Although mine's a go fast one, and it's not necessarily all-wheel drive, so it's kind of, yeah. I went a bit backwards. Yeah.
See? You'd miss us if we weren't here. Keep us on the air. Make a tax-deductible donation this end of financial year. Head to support.4ZZZ.org.au.
You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. My name is Ez. I use he, him pronouns.
And I'm Bridget, she, her.
We're chatting about lots of things. Oh my goodness. But we're mostly talking about transition and through difficult times, and it's also Tranzmission's 2-year anniversary this morning, so we're reminiscing on how it all began, and Bridget was a big part of that. So yeah, you can always listen back to the episode as well on 4ZZZ's website, 4ZZZ.org.au. You can head over to the programs, you can click on any of the 4ZZZ broadcasts, and you can listen back up to 5 episodes, music and everything all included. It's just a replay of the live deal. So yeah, you should do that. There's lots of stuff that we talk about on Tranzmission, but there's lots of stuff that heaps of our shows do, and they're so good, and everyone at the station is really trans, queer, and positive, and all encompassing, and it's a really warm and friendly place to be for Triple Z. Just really happy to be here. So with transitioning and with life and things changing, it's always like, I feel like there's so many iterations with transition and things, because like when I think about transition, I don't just specifically think about gender transition. I think about life transition. I think about from childhood to puberty, from being a teenager to being like a young, awkward adult, to then being like, in your 20s, and then now I'm in my 30s. I'm just starting my 30s. So I'm transitioning into a new phase of my life. And I feel like if people understood that at all points in our lives we're transitioning, then maybe you'll understand how gender is part of that in the fold. It's not necessarily, unique or like specific. Transition is unique to everyone. Everyone goes through huge life changes, and that can also include your style, how you dress, what kind of music you listen to, what kind of crowds you hang out with, what kind of ability and disability you have at different stages of your life. Yeah, I don't know. It's those are just some of my philosophical ponderings about like transition's not unique to trans people.
Yeah.
Transition is all the time. Especially like one of the biggest transitions a lot of people struggle with is actually from like being full-time work for like 40 years and then transitioning into retirement. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
So, and it's so much easier to transition when the society and the world around you supports you in that change. So I'm really proud of 4ZZZ for turning something that was really crap and turning it into something really powerful like Tranzmission. So thanks, Bridget, for doing that.
all good.
For inspiring it.
It sounds like you did a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of homework, and convincing the powers that be in here to do this whole thing, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I wouldn't say that the station is, I think that 4ZZZ prides itself on listening as much as it is a...
They probably didn't need a lot of convincing, but it sounded like you did do a lot of homework, though.
Yeah, well, it was fortunate that I think I was the person that was tasked with it, because I took it very seriously, and I think also... I take a lot of pride in radio production. It's a really creative medium, and maybe you, dear listener, maybe don't hear that or see that, but it is a really creative space to work in, and it's a platform for amplifying stories in a very specific kind of way. You're listening to just a voice, and you're trying to feel and relate to that voice or that music or that piece of, entertainment. And
like OG podcasts, almost.
Yeah, it's almost like, or TV killed the radio star, but radio is really kind of still coming back. It's not died, it's not gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think from like, we were talking about military and before as well, but, radio is also going to be very necessary in the future, because radio is like a really easily accessible thing that you can dial into. It's a frequency. It's not like regulated the same way that television and like internet is. If you lose your internet, if the satellites all dropped and it all went down,
big solar storm,
radio still works. So it's one of those things. Actually, I was reading somewhere recently that Sweden have sold out of portable radios because they're a little concerned about war.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
well,
the state of the world.
Yeah, the world's crazy. This hats have ruined everything.
Yeah, well, we left them in charge too long, Bridget. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and coming and sharing. You'll have to come back.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I will. I'll hold you to that. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Tranzmission. See you next Tuesday, 9 to 10 a.m. on 4ZZZ.